The night it all began didn't arrive with warnings or thunder. It slipped quietly into her life, wrapped in soft Christmas lights and the familiar scent of pine, hiding a truth sharp enough to fracture everything she believed about love and loyalty. Valeria stepped into the celebration expecting nothing more than another evening of polite smiles, unaware that every glittering ornament around her reflected a reality she was about to lose forever. Her heartbeat blended with the music, steady and unaware of the storm gathering in the distance. And in that room filled with laughter and champagne, destiny waited with patient cruelty. What unfolded next would reshape not only her marriage, but her understanding of the man she once trusted completely. As the music echoed through the hall, Valeria felt an unease she couldn't name, a fragile tremor beneath her skin that whispered warnings she wasn't yet willing to hear. People greeted her with practiced warmth, offering compliments that floated through the air without meaning, while her eyes searched instinctively for the one person who should have made the night feel safe. But even before she spotted him, something inside her already knew. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She sensed a gap opening beneath her feet, an invisible fracture widening with every passing second. And still, the night continued pretending to be beautiful. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe it. Then came the silence, the kind that doesn't descend from the room, but rises from within. A hush pressed against her thoughts, urging her to pay attention, urging her to see what she had ignored for months. Her chest tightened as she noticed glances she couldn't interpret, whispers that faded when she drew near, smiles too polished to be sincere. Every detail sharpened around her, turning the celebration into a stage where she felt painfully exposed. Something was approaching, something she could feel but could not yet grasp. And once it reached her, nothing would ever return to the way it was before. When the moment finally came, it didn't crash, it unfolded. Quiet, precise, devastating. A gesture she had never expected, delivered with a coldness she didn't recognize, shattered the fragile world she had been clinging to. Faces turned, conversations stopped, and there she stood, frozen, unprepared, unable to understand why the man she loved was dismantling their life in front of an audience. The room blurred around her as emotions collided violently in her chest. Confusion, humiliation, fear. A single decision made in front of strangers would send her down a path she never imagined walking. She couldn't know then that this painful beginning was not the true betrayal, nor the true danger. The real truth, the one hidden behind layers of guilt, fear, and desperation, waited silently on the other side of her heartbreak. A truth capable of rewriting everything she believed about the man who destroyed her that night. And if you stay with her until the end, you'll witness the moment that changes everything. For now, breathe with her, feel what she felt, and step with her into the darkness that would soon reveal a devastating light. If emotional stories resonate with you, make sure to subscribe and enable notifications so you never miss the next chapter of this journey. Valeria walked deeper into the Christmas hall, letting the warm glow of the lights settle around her as if they could soften the heaviness forming in her chest with every hesitant step she took into the crowd. The polished floor reflected moving silhouettes, but none of them felt familiar, none of them felt like home. She forced a small smile whenever someone greeted her, though she barely heard their words over the anxious rhythm pounding quietly beneath her ribs. Her dress shimmered under the golden lights, yet she felt painfully out of place, like a misplaced ornament in a celebration not meant for her. Something in the air felt wrong, an invisible current she couldn't describe but could no longer ignore. And with every second that passed, the sense of unease grew heavier, settling over her like frost. She tried to shake it off, unaware she was stepping toward the moment that would change everything. She scanned the room instinctively, searching for her husband, hoping his presence might silence the tension rising inside her like a slow, relentless tide that refused to be contained. But when she finally spotted him across the hall, the breath caught in her throat, not from relief, but from a sharp confusion she didn't understand. He wasn't alone. The woman beside him sparkled under the lights, laughing with effortless confidence, placing a delicate hand on his arm as if she belonged there. The sight pierced Valeria with a cold shock she tried to hide behind a composed expression. Her husband barely acknowledged her entrance, offering only a brief glance that felt more like dismissal than recognition. A chill ran through her veins, anchoring her to the floor. Something was very wrong, and deep down she knew the truth often hides behind the silence of the person we trust most. She moved cautiously through the hall, hoping she had misinterpreted the scene, trying to rationalize the woman's presence with excuses that dissolved the moment she saw how the guests reacted. Their subtle glances told her everything their mouths refused to say. Glances dipped in pity, amusement, and a quiet anticipation she didn't understand yet. A couple nearby whispered something while eyeing her dress, and though she couldn't hear the words, she recognized the mocking curve of their smiles. Her skin prickled uncomfortably as she felt the room's attention shift toward her in fragments, like shards of glass reflecting a truth she wasn't prepared to face. She drew in a slow breath, struggling to remain composed as the atmosphere tightened around her. Tonight was supposed to be peaceful. Instead, it felt like walking into a story where she was the only one who didn't know her role. As Valeria approached the table set at the corner of the hall, she noticed a single document placed neatly on top, shining under the soft glow of decorative candles arranged with meticulous care. Her stomach twisted violently when she recognized her name printed across the page, and for a moment her vision swayed with disbelief. Divorce papers. Waiting. Prepared. Presented as if they were part of the decor. Her pulse raced as her eyes darted around, desperate for an explanation that did not exist. Her husband approached slowly, but there was no warmth, no remorse. Only something unreadable, distant, and unsettlingly controlled. Behind him, the elegant blonde woman watched with silent satisfaction, her presence hovering like a cruel shadow over a truth Valeria had not yet accepted. The room seemed to close in, suffocating her with the weight of a betrayal she was still trying to comprehend. Her fingers trembled uncontrollably as she reached toward the document, not in agreement, but in disbelief, touching the cold paper as if confirming it was real would somehow make it less devastating. The chatter in the hall softened into a low murmur, the kind that stretches between curiosity and cruelty, as guests leaned subtly to witness the unfolding scene. Her husband's voice, low and detached, offered instructions with an almost businesslike tone that sliced through her chest. He didn't look at her the way he used to. He looked at her the way someone observes a problem being resolved. She searched his face for any sign of hesitation, any crack in the mask, but there was nothing. Only pressure. Only silence. Only the expectation that she would comply. And the realization shattered her with a quiet, unbearable pain. A tear slipped down her cheek before she even felt it forming, falling onto the table and blurring the ink of her printed name for a brief moment. She quickly wiped it away, ashamed of showing vulnerability before the very people who seemed eager to consume her humiliation like entertainment. Her breath trembled as she tried to steady her hands, but the trembling grew stronger the more she fought it. Memories flooded her, every promise, every sacrifice, every night she believed they were building something real together, now crumbling in a single, merciless moment. She felt exposed, stripped of dignity, surrounded by faces that watched her unravel. And yet, beneath the heartbreak, a seed of something began to stir, a thin, fragile line between breaking and awakening. Her husband placed a pen beside her, the gesture slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. It was then that she noticed the faint tremor in his fingers, not enough to be obvious, but enough for her to recognize it. And that tremor confused her more than his coldness. Fear? Hesitation? Guilt? She couldn't tell. But the contradiction unsettled her deeply, echoing like a quiet warning buried beneath the surface of his indifference. He stepped back, leaving her alone under the scrutiny of the entire hall, while the blonde beside him watched with a smile that stung like salt on an open wound. Valeria felt an unexpected wave of nausea, as if her body understood something her mind had not yet processed. Something wasn't right. Something didn't align with the cruelty she saw. Something darker pulsed beneath his icy expression. For a long moment, she simply stared at the papers, refusing to let the pen move, desperately trying to understand the urgency, the setting, the cruel timing. Why here? Why now? Why in front of so many people? None of it matched the man she once knew, even in anger. Her tears blurred the lines again. But through the haze, she caught a glimpse of something at the edge of her vision. A man she didn't recognize watching the scene with intense focus. Not amusement. Not pity. Something else. His expression didn't match the room's cruel curiosity. It carried knowledge. Intent. Warning. Valeria's breath faltered as his gaze briefly met hers, holding for just a second before shifting away. Whatever was happening tonight, it was bigger than betrayal, and part of her already sensed it, even if she didn't yet understand. Valeria forced herself to breathe, gripping the edge of the table as if anchoring her shaking body to something stable while the world she knew collapsed in slow, agonizing motion beneath her feet. The music, once festive and warm, now sounded distant and warped, like echoes from a life that no longer belonged to her. From the corner of her eye, she saw guests adjusting their posture, leaning slightly closer, their curiosity sharpening into something intrusive and cruel. She wasn't imagining it. They were waiting for her to break. A flush of heat crawled across her neck as her humiliation deepened. Yet beneath the shock, she sensed an unfamiliar tension pulsing through the room, as though people knew more than she did. The feeling unsettled her even more than the divorce papers themselves. Her husband stepped back toward the blonde woman, their closeness painfully obvious, every detail of their shared posture telling a story Valeria wished she could unsee. The blonde whispered something into his ear, her lips barely moving, her eyes glimmering with a satisfaction that twisted Valeria's stomach. The guests around them exchanged glances full of knowing smirks, as if the entire room was in on a truth she hadn't been allowed to know. Her husband's expression remained cold, but something in his jaw betrayed tension, an inexplicable strain that didn't match the cruelty he displayed. That contradiction, icy dismissal paired with a trembling restraint, felt wrong, deeply wrong. It was as if two versions of him were battling behind his composed mask, and she couldn't tell which one was the truth. She reached for the pen again, her fingers brushing the cold metal as a wave of dizziness washed over her. The murmurs behind her swelled, forming an unspoken pressure urging her to sign, to end the spectacle, to give the audience the closure they craved. Her breath hitched as shame clawed up her throat, making it difficult to swallow. How had her life reduced itself to a public scene in which strangers consumed her pain like entertainment? She blinked rapidly, trying to clear her vision, but tears kept pooling stubbornly. Her husband stood rigid, watching her with unreadable eyes. And though he didn't say a word, she felt the weight of something unspoken pressing violently between them. Fear? Warning? Regret? She couldn't tell, but she felt it. The blonde shifted her posture, gliding a hand across her luxurious dress as she stepped slightly closer to Valeria, as if eager to witness her collapse from a better angle. Her perfume drifted through the air, sweet, expensive, suffocating, wrapping Valeria in a nauseating cloud. Behind them, someone laughed softly, the cruel sound slicing through the tension like a blade. Valeria clenched her jaw, trying to steady her breathing as she forced her gaze downward. Signing the papers felt like sinking into ice water. But refusing to sign, something told her that option was far more dangerous than the humiliation crushing her in that moment. Every instinct screamed that the room wasn't reacting naturally. They weren't just gossiping. They were waiting, anticipating, expecting. In the middle of the growing chaos inside her mind, Valeria sensed movement near the back of the hall. The same man she had noticed earlier, a stranger with a steady, focused gaze, was watching her again, his eyes fixed not on her shame, but on her husband. His expression reflected tension, calculation, and something disturbingly close to urgency. Every time a new person approached her table, his gaze flicked toward them as if measuring their intention. Valeria's pulse quickened, confusion spiraling. Why would a stranger watch her husband instead of her? Why did his posture seem alert, almost protective? The connection unsettled her deeply. The room no longer felt like a place of celebration. It felt staged, charged, manipulated by forces she couldn't see. A chill spread down her spine. Her hand trembled as she lifted the pen, the golden lights blurring into distorted halos as her tears multiplied. Her vision swam, but she knew there was no delaying the inevitable. Her husband's voice finally cut through the room. Quiet, sharp, controlled. Sign it. Not a plea, not a request, a command. And yet, beneath the command, she heard something else. a barely contained urgency, a tremor hidden behind the words. He wasn't angry. He was afraid. Of what? Valeria felt her heart hammer painfully as she realized she might not be the only one trapped in this moment. But before she could think deeper, the room seemed to close around her like a fist. She pressed the pen to the paper. As the ink touched the signature line, a sharp gasp rippled through a small circle of guests nearby, not from sympathy, but from anticipation, as if her pain confirmed a rumor they had been waiting to witness. The blonde smirked openly now, her satisfaction no longer something she bothered to hide. Valeria exhaled shakily, her shoulders collapsing inward as the world dimmed. She signed her name slowly, each stroke carving heartbreak into the page. When the pen fell from her hand, the room erupted into soft whispers, rising like smoke. She felt hollow, weightless, as if something essential had been torn from her in front of an audience that had never cared about her to begin with. She kept her eyes lowered, too frightened to face the finality of what she had just done. Her husband stepped forward to retrieve the papers, but something in his posture shifted, barely visible, but unmistakable to her eyes after years of intimacy. His breath faltered, his lips tightened, his eyes flickered toward the stranger watching from across the room. Fear again, real fear. And in that instant, Valeria understood one thing clearly. Nothing about tonight was what it seemed. Something far more dangerous than infidelity or divorce lingered in the shadows of the celebration, tightening its grip around them all. And whatever truth was coming for her was already here. Valeria remained seated, her breath trembling as she tried to make sense of the chaos swirling around her. But her mind refused to settle as her gaze instinctively followed her husband's movements, searching for a piece of humanity that once brought her comfort. Instead, she found a man whose eyes carried a storm she didn't recognize, a tension that didn't belong to betrayal or guilt alone. His shoulders rose with each shallow breath as if he were bracing himself for something unseen, something far heavier than a public divorce. The blonde beside him tilted her head, whispering something low into his ear, but his posture didn't soften. It stiffened. Every detail felt wrong. Every reaction contradicted the narrative unfolding around her. And deep in her chest, something cold and instinctive began to awaken. Her gaze drifted subtly toward the stranger once more, the one who seemed to watch the room with purpose rather than curiosity. He didn't look at her with pity like the others, nor with ridicule. His stare carried urgency, a warning embedded in silence. And every time her husband shifted uncomfortably, the stranger's jaw tightened. Valeria felt her heartbeat quicken as the realization crept into her mind like a shadow slipping beneath a door. The stranger wasn't there to witness drama. He was there because he expected danger. But danger for whom? For her? For her husband? For both? Her trembling fingers curled slowly against the tablecloth as she felt fear and confusion intertwine like vines growing too fast to control. Her husband turned slightly, and for the briefest moment, his eyes met hers. The collision of their gazes sent a jolt through her, not because of cruelty, but because of the unmistakable flash of panic inside them. It wasn't anger. It wasn't coldness. It was terror. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but immediately shut it when two guests nearby stepped closer, pretending to refill their drinks while clearly eavesdropping. His gaze flicked toward them, then toward the blonde, then toward the stranger. She had never seen him like this, cornered, fragile, desperate to hide something larger than both of them. The mask of arrogance he wore moments earlier collapsed for a fraction of a second, revealing a truth she didn't understand yet. And that single second was enough to unravel everything she thought she knew. A shiver crawled up her arms as she recalled how he had insisted she sign quickly, how his voice trembled beneath its coldness, how his fingers shook when placing the pen beside her hand. That tremor wasn't disgust. It wasn't disdain. It was fear. A fear so deep it forced him to play the role of executioner just to protect her from some invisible threat closing in around them. The idea felt impossible, absurd even, but something in her gut refused to dismiss it. She replayed the moment he avoided touching her, the way he stood slightly angled as if shielding her from view, the way his eyes darted around the hall, scanning faces she had never noticed before. Nothing about tonight was natural. Nothing about his behavior aligned with infidelity or cruelty. Something darker lingered beneath the surface. As the room swelled with whispers, Valeria pushed herself to stand, her knees wobbling beneath the weight of the emotional blow she had endured. The crowd parted subtly, like a sea of judgment and spectacle, allowing her to walk forward, but never without their eyes burning into her skin. The pressure was suffocating, but curiosity stronger than shame tugged her toward the unsettling truth hiding in her husband's eyes. She took a step closer to him, determined to confront him, but the blonde moved deliberately into her path, blocking her with a chilling smile that sharpened like a blade disguised in silk. Something in that smile twisted Valeria's stomach with dread. There was no affection in it, only calculation. Before Valeria could react, her husband snapped sharply at the blonde, his voice low but coated in panic, startling both women. The blonde stiffened, her smile vanishing as she stepped back with visible irritation. It was the first time that night Valeria saw him lose his composure, even slightly. And that loss revealed more truth than any words he had spoken. This wasn't a man celebrating his liberation. This was a man trapped in a tightening cage, performing a role enforced by someone else. The stranger across the room shifted his weight, as if preparing for something, confirming her suspicions. Whatever her husband was hiding, he was running out of time to hide it. Valeria's breath grew heavier as she searched his eyes again, hoping for even a hint of explanation. For a split second, she saw it: regret, fear, longing, and something like an apology buried beneath layers of terror. It struck her with breathtaking force. A man doesn't look like that unless he's protecting something or someone, with everything he has left. Her chest tightened painfully as she realized the truth she had been too devastated to consider. Maybe the divorce wasn't rejection. Maybe it was protection. But from what? Her thoughts spiraled dangerously, grasping for answers in a room full of manufactured smiles and hidden motives, when suddenly a soft chime echoed through the hall, the signal of a message on her husband's phone. He froze, completely, as if the entire world had just narrowed to a single point of fear. The moment her husband froze, the atmosphere inside the hall shifted as if an invisible thread had snapped, sending a silent shockwave through the room that only Valeria seemed able to feel. His hand hovered stiffly above his phone, eyes locked onto the screen with a terror so raw it stripped away the last remnants of the cold facade he had worn all evening. His breath hitched, sharp and shallow, and his shoulders tensed with the rigidness of someone bracing for impact. Guests nearby continued their chatter, unaware or uncaring of the storm brewing at the center of the celebration. But Valeria saw everything. The air thickened around her, heavy with dread, tightening like a vice across her ribs. She had no idea what the message contained, but she knew. Instantly, it was the reason behind everything. Her husband's fingers trembled violently as he lowered the phone, his complexion drained of color, leaving him ghost pale beneath the warm Christmas lights. The blonde woman leaned in quickly, trying to glimpse the screen, but he shielded it with a sudden sharpness that startled even her. Her expression shifted from curiosity to frustration, then to something colder, something calculating. Valeria watched the exchange with widening eyes, noticing how the blonde's demeanor changed the moment she was denied access. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't concern. It was irritation at being excluded from a conversation she believed she was entitled to hear. The realization made Valeria's skin prickle with unease. Whatever was happening, the blonde wasn't an innocent bystander. She was involved, somehow. Before Valeria could piece together her suspicions, her husband stumbled backward, steadying himself against a table as the phone clutched in his hand vibrated again with a rapid, urgent insistence. His eyes flicked around the room as if searching for an exit, or perhaps searching for someone he feared might already be watching. The stranger across the hall shifted his posture once more, lifting his chin slightly, his expression tightening with unmistakable recognition. Valeria felt her heart climb into her throat as she realized the stranger wasn't just observing. He was waiting for this exact moment. Every nerve in her body sharpened with an instinct she didn't know she possessed. Something was coming. Something she wasn't prepared to face. Her husband finally unlocked his phone and glanced at the new notification, and Valeria saw his throat tighten as he swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward her with a desperation he could no longer conceal. It was the first time that night he truly looked at her, not as a liability, not as a stranger, but as someone he feared for. That single glance pierced her like a blade. Before she could move closer, he snapped his attention toward the blonde, his voice a harsh whisper as he ordered her to stay back, with a tone that surprised everyone within earshot. The blonde's eyes narrowed sharply, her mask cracking with hostility. Guests around them stiffened, sensing tension thick enough to cut. Valeria's pulse hammered. The message had triggered something dangerous, something irreversible. The stranger took a deliberate step forward, weaving subtly through the crowd, and though no one else seemed to notice, Valeria felt the air shift around him like a silent warning carried on the wind. Her husband saw him approaching and stiffened even more, pressing the phone to his chest as if guarding it from every direction. For one terrifying moment, Valeria thought he might run. His eyes darted between the stranger, the blonde, and the exits in quick, frantic flickers. She recognized that look. Not of guilt, not of betrayal, but of a man hunted. A man cornered by something larger than himself. A man who knew his time for hiding had run out. The truth behind his cruelty and confusion was no longer buried. It was erupting to the surface, whether he wanted it to or not. Valeria's breath trembled as she cautiously stepped forward, her voice soft but urgent as she whispered his name, hoping to anchor him, hoping for even a fragment of clarity. At the sound of her voice, he flinched, not in rejection, but in anguish. His eyes flickered with pain so intense it stole her breath, and in that split second, every accusation she had hurled at him in her mind dissolved into confusion and fear. Before she could reach him, he raised a trembling hand, signaling for her to stop, his expression pleading without a single spoken word. The gesture contradicted everything she had believed about tonight. If he wanted to hurt her, he wouldn't hesitate. Instead, he appeared terrified she might get too close. Terrified of what her proximity might bring. The phone vibrated once more, but this time the sound echoed unervingly through the hall, bouncing off walls decorated with garlands and shimmering lights, transforming the festive atmosphere into something sinister. The blonde reached toward him again, but he jerked away, snapping her name with an intensity that silenced the nearest conversations. The stranger moved closer, his eyes locked onto her husband with unyielding focus, as if urging him to make a decision before it was too late. Valeria felt her knees weaken as dread rose like a cold wave drowning her from within. She didn't know what the message said, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever danger her husband was trapped in now involved her too. Her husband finally broke under the pressure and exhaled sharply, the sound painful and ragged, as though it carried all the secrets he had been forced to carry alone. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he extended the phone toward his chest, shielding the screen from everyone except Valeria. His voice shook as he whispered, barely audible, "Don't look at them. Look at me." The command, soft and desperate, rooted her in place. Everything inside her screamed to run, to hide, to demand answers. But she held his gaze instead, frozen by the raw fear reflected in his eyes. Fear that wasn't for himself. Fear that was for her. Then, with a broken whisper, he said the words that shattered the last illusion she had. "They're already here." For a long moment, Valeria couldn't breathe, her mind scrambling to understand the meaning behind her husband's whispered confession as the festive lights around them blurred into a haze that swallowed every trace of warmth. The music seemed to warp, fading into the background while her pulse pounded violently in her ears. "They're already here." The words repeated in her mind like a cold echo, chilling her from the inside out. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but her voice refused to emerge. Her husband's gaze remained locked on hers, begging her to stay calm despite the terror shaking his entire frame. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he shifted his eyes toward the stranger across the room. And that was when Valeria understood. This man was not here by coincidence. The stranger stepped closer with the kind of controlled composure that belonged to someone trained to navigate danger without drawing attention. His movements quiet but precise as he approached the center of the hall, where tension coiled like a living force around them. Guests continued chatting, oblivious to the shifting undercurrent, but Valeria felt every second sharpen into something dangerous and brittle. The stranger's eyes met her husband's with a silent understanding that suggested they were not strangers at all, but adversaries bound by a shared secret. Her stomach twisted as she realized this had nothing to do with betrayal or love triangles. This was something far darker, something criminal, something deadly, and she was standing at the center of it without knowing why. Her husband clenched his fists, his breathing uneven, trying to hold himself together as the stranger finally reached their table and paused, studying Valeria with eyes that carried both warning and empathy. "You don't know me," he said softly, his voice firm but gentle enough not to alarm the guests around them. "But I need you to listen carefully." Valeria stiffened, instinctively stepping back, but the stranger raised a reassuring hand. "I'm not here to hurt you." His gaze flickered toward her husband. "But he hasn't told you the truth. And he won't. Not while they're watching." The word they hit her like another blow. She felt small, fragile, exposed in a room full of people. "Who?" she whispered, her voice cracking. The stranger's jaw tightened, and he answered with chilling clarity. "The people he's been running from." Valeria's breath froze. She turned to her husband, searching his expression for denial, for reassurance, for anything that contradicted the nightmare unfolding before her. Instead, she saw only the slow collapse of his defenses, the truth finally bleeding through his eyes. He dropped his stare to the floor, shoulders trembling under a weight she never knew existed. "I tried to keep you out of it," he whispered, voice breaking. "I thought if you hated me, they'd leave you alone." The confession twisted her heart violently, but there was no time to process the emotional devastation. The stranger cut in sharply, his tone urgent. "They've been watching both of you tonight. And now that message means they're ready to move." Valeria felt faint. Every instinct screamed danger, but she still didn't understand what she had been dragged into. Before she could ask, the stranger swiftly stepped closer, shielding her partially from view, as if expecting something to happen. His posture became defensive, his eyes scanning the hall with the focus of someone tracking hidden threats among a crowd of unknowing guests. "You need to trust me for the next few minutes," he said quietly. "Whatever happens, don't react. Don't run. Don't draw attention. Just stay by me." Valeria felt panic claw its way up her throat. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why are they watching me?" Her husband closed his eyes, shame overwhelming him. The stranger hesitated, then delivered the truth with grave precision. Because hurting him wasn't enough. Valeria staggered backward, breath hitching violently. The blonde watched with narrowed eyes, understanding nothing yet sensing everything. Her husband reached toward her instinctively, but the stranger blocked him with one swift motion, the tension between them snapping like a wire stretched too tight. "No sudden moves," the stranger warned sharply. "You're making it worse." Her husband lowered his hand, agony etched across his face. Valeria stood frozen between them, torn by confusion, fear, and lingering love that felt like a wound being ripped open. "I never meant to drag you into this," her husband said hoarsely. "They threatened you. I thought ending us in public would protect you. I didn't have another choice." His voice cracked as he added, "I thought humiliation would keep you alive." Valeria pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, the weight of those words crushing her from the inside out. The stranger leaned toward her slightly, lowering his voice even further. "You're not safe here. They're minutes away from making a move, and once they do, the crowd will become your worst enemy." Valeria looked around nervously, noticing subtle details she had missed. Unfamiliar faces watching her from afar, a man pretending to check his watch too often, a woman near the tree whispering into a phone. Fear tightened around Valeria's chest like a fist. Everything she had believed about this night, every humiliation, every cruel smile, was nothing compared to what truly hid beneath the surface. The stranger's voice steadied her. "I need you to walk with me. Not run. Walk. If you run, they'll follow." Her husband stepped forward, desperation radiating off him. "Please," he begged quietly. "Go with him. It's the only chance you have." His voice cracked with anguish, and tears welled in his eyes. Tears she had never seen from him before. That sight alone nearly broke her. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions, to demand why he had lied, why he had destroyed her heart if he loved her, why he had chosen silence instead of trust. But none of those answers could save her now. The stranger placed a steady hand at her back. "Valeria," he said firmly, "we have to move." She swallowed hard, her pulse thundering as she nodded slowly. And then, with the weight of an entire broken life pressing against her chest, she stepped toward the stranger, into the truth she never asked for, but could no longer escape. Valeria felt the stranger's hand lightly guide her forward, the contact firm enough to anchor her, yet gentle enough to avoid drawing attention from anyone watching. Her legs trembled beneath her as she stepped away from the table, leaving behind the documents that had shattered her world only moments earlier. The Christmas lights flickered across polished surfaces, turning the hall into a distorted dream where danger lurked behind every glimmering reflection. Her breath grew shallow as her senses sharpened, noticing details she had never seen before. Faces turning too quickly, conversations fading when she passed, eyes tracking her movements with unnatural precision. The stranger walked at her side with calculated calm, masking urgency beneath a controlled stride. Each step felt like moving through a storm she didn't understand. Her husband remained behind, standing frozen at the table with pain carved into his expression, watching her leave as if he were losing the last piece of hope he had left in the world. Their eyes met for a split second, a silent collision of heartbreak, guilt, and a love twisted by impossible circumstances. She wanted to run back to him, to scream for answers, to demand the truth he had hidden so cruelly. But the stranger's presence beside her reminded her of the danger that shadowed them. Her husband's expression shifted into a final plea, one that begged her not to hesitate, not to look back, not to question. It was the look of a man who knew he couldn't save himself, but prayed she still could be saved. As they moved through the hall, the stranger leaned slightly toward her, keeping his voice low enough to avoid drawing attention. "You're doing well," he said quietly. "Just a few more steps." His tone was calm, steady, almost soothing, but Valeria felt the tension vibrating beneath his words. "Who are they?" she whispered shakily, unable to contain her fear. The stranger's jaw tightened. "People who don't care who gets hurt," he answered. "People who watched your husband too closely for too long." Valeria swallowed hard, her heart pounding as she processed the chilling truth. "And you?" she asked. "Why are you helping me?" For the first time, his expression softened. "Because you're not supposed to be part of this." And he knew that. They reached the far end of the hall, where the lights dimmed slightly and the chatter thinned into scattered murmurs. A waiter stepped out from a corridor, his eyes following them with an intensity far sharper than curiosity. Valeria felt a wave of icy dread rush through her veins. The stranger subtly shifted his body between her and the waiter, his posture tightening like a shield preparing for impact. The waiter nodded politely, but his gaze lingered too long, tracking their every movement. "Keep walking," the stranger murmured. Valeria forced herself to move, her legs stiff and trembling. The waiter's stare burned into her back, confirming what the stranger had warned. She was being watched by people who wanted her exactly where she didn't want to be. As they turned toward the side exit, Valeria heard footsteps behind them, slow, measured, deliberate. She didn't dare look over her shoulder, but her chest constricted with fear as the strangers subtly increased their pace. "Don't react," he warned under his breath. "They're testing to see if you panic." Valeria clenched her fists, trying to steady her breathing as the room's warmth dissolved into suffocating tension. She felt eyes piercing through her like invisible blades. Every instinct urged her to run, to scream, to disappear into the shadows. But the stranger kept her moving, each step guided with quiet authority. "You're stronger than you think," he murmured. "Just hold on." A group of guests passed them, laughing loudly, unaware of the silent chase unfolding beside them. But one man, a tall figure in a dark suit, didn't join the laughter. He watched Valeria with a fixed stare, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. The stranger subtly pulled her closer, his voice tightening. "Don't look at him," he whispered. "He's not supposed to be here." Valeria's knees nearly buckled. "How many are there?" she asked in a trembling breath. "Enough," he replied grimly. "Enough to make your husband desperate enough to break you tonight, just to keep you alive tomorrow." She felt her heart split with grief, pain, and fear all at once. The world she knew burned silently behind her. As they neared the exit, the stranger slowed, scanning the path ahead. "They'll expect you to run," he murmured. "So we won't." His calmness shocked her. "What if they follow?" she breathed. He met her eyes briefly, a glimmer of determination flashing within them. "Then they follow me," he said. "Not you." The words struck her with a confusing mix of relief and guilt. She didn't know him. She didn't know why he was risking himself for her. But something in his expression, something raw, resolute, and honest, told her she could trust him more than the man she had spent years loving. Tonight, trust had nothing to do with history. It had everything to do with survival. They reached the door. A cold gust seeped through the small gap beneath it, carrying the faint scent of winter air. The stranger paused, turning slightly to shield Valeria as he reached for the handle. His movements slowed, calculated, prepared. "Once we step outside," he said in a low, measured voice, "everything changes." Valeria felt her pulse drum against her ribs, each beat a reminder that her life had fractured into something unrecognizable. She swallowed the fear climbing her throat and nodded. The stranger's hand tightened briefly on her arm, a silent promise that she wasn't alone. Then, with a deep breath, he pushed the door open, and the night swallowed them. The cold night air hit Valeria like a slap, sharp and startling, stripping away the suffocating warmth of the hall as she stepped into the dimly lit parking area where shadows stretched long across the pavement under flickering lamps. Her breath caught at the sudden temperature change, fogging briefly in front of her before dissolving into the darkness that surrounded them. The stranger moved her quickly to the side, guiding her behind a row of cars where they could not be seen from the party entrance. His posture transformed instantly, no longer blended into the crowd, but standing like a sentinel bracing for danger. Valeria hugged her arms around herself, trembling. The silence outside felt heavier than the noise inside, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for something to break. She glanced back toward the glowing windows of the hall, watching silhouettes move inside, completely unaware of the nightmare unraveling just beyond the doors. Her husband remained somewhere inside. She could feel it, a gravitational pull that tugged painfully at her chest. The image of him standing alone shattered her, but the stranger's voice snapped her back. "Don't look," he warned softly. "If they see hesitation, they'll act faster." She tore her gaze away, heart pounding violently. "You need to tell me what this is," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What did he get involved in?" The stranger hesitated, scanning the shadows around them before answering. "Something he never should have touched," he murmured. "And something that doesn't forget who gets in the way." A gust of wind brushed past them, rustling the branches near the sidewalk and carrying faint sounds from a distant street. Normal noises, nothing unusual, but to Valeria everything felt sinister and magnified. She studied the stranger carefully, noticing the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept moving, tracking every detail. "You're not just someone who happened to be there," she said softly. "You knew this would happen." He didn't deny it. Instead, he exhaled heavily. "I was sent to watch him," he admitted. "Your husband made enemies long before tonight. Enemies who don't accept apologies or excuses." The revelation hit her like a blow to the stomach. She had suspected something, but hearing it confirmed, he was being hunted, made her knees weaken. "Enemies?" she repeated. "Dangerous ones," he said quietly. "Very." The stranger stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Look, whatever he told you, or didn't tell you, he wasn't lying about the threat." Valeria felt tears burn behind her eyelids, but she forced them back. "Then why drag me into it?" Her voice cracked under the weight of betrayal. The stranger's expression softened with sympathy. "Because you were his leverage," he answered. "The one thing they knew he cared about enough to break. They watched him, tested him, pushed him. Tonight was their final move." Valeria's heart clenched painfully as she understood the horrifying truth. She had been a pawn in a game she never knew existed. Her humiliation, her heartbreak, her public collapse, all of it orchestrated by forces she had never seen. "He thought divorcing you would save you," the stranger said gently. He was wrong. As the words settled, Valeria felt her world tilt dangerously. Her husband's coldness, the cruel spectacle, the urgency, everything made sense now. "What did they want from him?" she asked, voice trembling. The stranger's eyes darkened. "Information," he replied. "Access. Silence." He tried to pull away. "They don't like when someone tries to leave." A shiver crawled across her spine. "So they threatened him?" The stranger nodded grimly. "And when he didn't comply, they threatened you." Valeria stepped back as if physically struck, her breath catching painfully. Her husband hadn't destroyed her life out of malice. He had done it out of desperation. But the cost had been unbearable. And now, She was standing in the aftermath of a choice she never had a chance to refuse. Footsteps echoed faintly from the distance, slow, deliberate, closing in. The stranger reacted instantly, pulling Valeria deeper between the cars, shielding her with his body as he peered through the shadows. "Not yet," he whispered sharply. Valeria froze, gripping the sleeve of his coat with trembling fingers. The footsteps paused, then resumed at a different angle, as if adjusting direction. The stranger's shoulders tensed. "They're sweeping the lot," he murmured. "Looking for anyone who shouldn't be here." Valeria's chest tightened with panic. "Why would they come after me now?" she whispered. "Because tonight's message wasn't for him," the stranger said. "It was for you. They know you saw fear in his eyes. That makes you dangerous." Valeria's pulse thundered. She was no longer collateral. She was a target. Her vision blurred as fear threatened to overwhelm her. But the stranger grasped her shoulders firmly, grounding her. "Listen to me," he said, his tone steady and unwavering. "You're not alone. I'm here because someone finally decided you deserve the truth. And because you deserve a chance to live beyond it." Valeria swallowed hard, trying to cling to his words. She had felt alone for so long, abandoned, discarded, humiliated. But now the truth revealed a far darker reality, one that connected her fate to shadows she never knew existed. The stranger looked into her eyes with fierce determination. "I can get you out," he said softly. "But you need to trust me completely. No hesitation. No looking back." Valeria nodded, tears threatening again. Trust wasn't something she had left, but survival demanded it. Suddenly, a voice called out from across the parking lot. A sharp, commanding sound that sliced through the night. The stranger stiffened, his grip tightening on her arm. "They've spotted something," he whispered urgently. Valeria felt her heartbeat crash into her ribs as adrenaline surged through her veins. The stranger angled her behind him, shielding her fully. "Stay close," he said. "This is where everything changes." And as the dark figures began to emerge from the shadows, Valeria realized the truth she had been avoiding all night. Her husband hadn't ruined her life. He had been trying to save it. The moment the figures stepped from the shadows, Valeria felt the world tilt, her breath halting as the danger she had only imagined finally took visible form beneath the dim parking lot lights. 3 men emerged from opposite directions, their movements slow, calculated, and synchronized in a way that made every instinct inside her scream to run. They didn't shout, didn't rush, didn't brandish weapons. Their silence was far more terrifying. Predators never announced themselves. The stranger pulled her closer, angling his body protectively as he assessed each approaching threat with sharp precision. Valeria's heart hammered violently against her ribs, each beat echoing the terrifying truth she could no longer deny. She was no longer just caught in her husband's downfall. She had become part of the hunt. One of the men pretended to check his phone as he advanced, feigning casualness while his eyes tracked their exact position with chilling focus. Another circled behind parked cars, adjusting their angle of approach. Their coordination told Valeria everything she needed to know. This wasn't intimidation. This was an extraction, a capture. The stranger stepped slightly forward, shielding her completely from sight, his voice a low whisper. "No matter what happens, you don't let go of my hand." She nodded shakily, fear tightening her lungs. "Why are they after me?" she managed to ask. The stranger didn't sugarcoat it. "Because hurting you hurts him," he said. "And tonight, they want to finish what they started." Valeria swallowed hard, her body trembling uncontrollably. The night felt colder than before. Her mind flashed back to the hall, her husband's panic, the trembling in his hands, the way he had begged her to go. A wave of grief crushed her chest. For months she had blamed him for abandoning her, for destroying their life. Now she saw the truth. He had been drowning under a threat too big to outrun, choosing the only ruthless defense he had left, distancing her from himself. Even if it broke her, even if it destroyed everything good between them. The stranger sensed her spiral and tightened his grip reassuringly. "Focus on my steps," he whispered. "Don't look at them. Look at me." She forced herself to breathe, to ground herself in his steady presence while panic coiled like fire in her veins. The tallest man stepped into the direct glow of a street lamp, revealing a face that sent a chill through Valeria's spine. Expressionless, emotionless, trained. This wasn't someone who worked in boardrooms or business schemes. This was someone who followed orders without hesitation. Someone whose eyes held no hesitation, no conscience. Valeria instinctively stepped back, pressing into the stranger's side as the man's gaze locked onto her with chilling certainty. "They've identified you," the stranger murmured, tension tightening his voice. "We move now." The man lifted a hand as if signaling to someone unseen. And in that moment, Valeria realized they had more people positioned deeper in the dark. More eyes, more danger. The parking lot was a web, and she was standing at its center. The stranger shifted his weight, positioning himself between her and the advancing men, calculating their distance with each second. "When I say go, you walk," he whispered. "Not run, walk. Running will signal panic and escalate everything." Valeria nodded, though terror pulsed through her like a second heartbeat. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Somewhere they can't reach you," he answered. His tone carried a certainty she wanted desperately to trust. Her breath grew shallow, her fingers clutching his coat as shadows moved again. Another man stepping from behind a pillar, blocking one of the exits. The stranger's posture tightened. "They're closing every escape except the one they want you to take," he murmured. "They want control, not chaos." Valeria felt dread twist inside her. A soft buzz echoed from the stranger's coat, his phone. He glanced at the screen just long enough to pale slightly. "It's worse than I thought," he muttered. Valeria's anxiety spiked. "What does it say?" He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the men inching closer. "It says they're not here for negotiation. They want leverage. And your leverage." Her stomach dropped. She felt like collapsing, but the stranger caught her arm before her knees gave out. "Stay with me," he insisted. "We're not losing tonight." She nodded, fighting the rising panic. Everything she had believed about her life had been ripped apart in a matter of hours. But for the first time, she sensed the faint outline of a path through the darkness. A path she couldn't walk alone. One of the men took another step forward, and the stranger reacted instantly, subtly guiding Valeria backward, placing a car between them and the threat. The metal frame became a fragile barrier, offering mere seconds of shelter. Valeria felt her voice tremble. "They're getting closer." The stranger nodded once, steady and composed. "Then we move faster." He scanned the lot again, mapping every angle, every shadow, every potential escape route. Then his eyes locked onto a gap between two cars leading toward a side street. His jaw tightened. "That's our way out." Valeria followed his gaze and felt dread and hope clash violently inside her. It was narrow, dark, uncertain, but it was something. He turned to her once more, leaning close enough that she could feel the urgency in his breath. "When I say go," he repeated, "you don't stop. No matter what you hear behind you. Understand?" Valeria nodded, tears burning her eyes. She understood better than he realized. This wasn't just escape. This was survival. The stranger squeezed her hand, grounding her, preparing her, steadying her heart. Then he whispered the word that made her pulse explode in her ears. "Now." The stranger pulled Valeria into the narrow gap between the cars with swift precision, his movements silent yet urgent as the shadows behind them erupted with sudden commotion. Heavy footsteps pounded against the pavement as the men realized their target was slipping from their carefully constructed net. Valeria's pulse thundered in her ears as she struggled to keep pace, the cold air burning her lungs with each breath. The stranger glanced back, calculating distances, adjusting their path with relentless focus. "Keep moving," he whispered sharply. But beneath his urgency, there was something else. Fear not for himself, but for her. And as they pushed deeper into the darkness of the lot, Valeria felt a haunting certainty settle inside her. Whatever truths had been hidden until now were about to surface, and none of them would come gently. They emerged into a side street lit only by distant lamps, long shadows stretching across cracked pavement like lines drawn by fate itself. The stranger slowed, checking behind them before guiding her toward a recessed doorway where they could catch their breath without being seen. Valeria pressed a trembling hand to her chest, trying to steady the panic threatening to swallow her whole. "Why are they doing this?" she managed to whisper. The stranger hesitated, his eyes flicking between her and the shadows shifting behind them. "Because your husband made a mistake," he said. "A big one. And you're the only loose and they can still control." The words dropped into her stomach like stones. "What mistake?" she demanded. The stranger exhaled sharply. He found something he shouldn't have inside his company, and instead of staying silent, he tried to expose it. For a moment, Valeria felt her entire world tilt as memories of her husband's late nights, concealed phone calls, and sudden mood shifts collided with the truth she had never been allowed to see. He tried to report them, the stranger continued, but someone on the inside intercepted the information. They warned him to stop. He didn't. Valeria's breath trembled as she grasped the scale of the danger surrounding them. Her husband hadn't been cold. He had been terrified, and the weight of that revelation nearly shattered her. "So they threatened me," she whispered. The stranger nodded grimly. "They knew you were the only leverage strong enough to break him." The words sliced through her heart with brutal precision. She had hated him, blamed him, and all along, he had been fighting a silent war to save her. Footsteps echoed from the street behind them, snapping the stranger's attention instantly toward the sound. He pulled Valeria deeper into the shadows, positioning his body as a barrier between her and whatever approached. Two figures passed the entrance of the alley, scanning each doorway with chilling deliberation before moving on. Valeria's legs trembled, adrenaline flooding her veins. "They won't stop," she whispered. The stranger nodded. "Not until they erase every trace of what he discovered." She swallowed hard. What did he find? The stranger hesitated, this time not out of caution, but out of the weight of what he was about to reveal. Evidence of financial routes used to fund offshore operations linked to extremely dangerous people, he said quietly. People who don't tolerate betrayal. The truth hit her like a tidal wave. Valeria pressed a hand to her mouth as tears welled, the gravity of the situation crushing her. Her husband hadn't destroyed her life. He had sacrificed himself to keep her out of the crosshairs. But the stranger wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, his voice tight. He didn't just discover the routes. He identified one of the internal handlers. Someone trusted. Someone who realized he was closer to the truth than anyone else. Valeria's pulse quickened. "Who?" The stranger's eyes darkened. "The woman who stood beside him tonight." A chill stabbed through Valeria's spine. The blonde. The one who smirked as she signed the papers. The one who hovered with calculated elegance. "She works for them," Valeria whispered. "She controls him," the stranger replied. Or at least, she thought she did. Before Valeria could process the shock, a vibration buzzed in the stranger's pocket. He checked the screen, and his expression hardened. "They know you're not inside anymore," he murmured. "They're spreading out." Valeria's chest constricted painfully. "What do we do?" The stranger stepped closer, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "We reach the safe point. If we get there, everything changes." She nodded, swallowing fear that threatened to choke her. But then he added, "There's something else you need to understand before we move." Valeria blinked, confusion piercing through the panic. "What?" His eyes softened, carrying a truth heavy enough to reshape everything she believed. "He didn't want a divorce," he said quietly. "He never wanted to hurt you. He signed those papers too." Valeria froze as the words ripped through her, her breath disappearing in a rush of disbelief and heartbreak. "He signed them because they told him to show he'd cut emotional ties," the stranger explained. "They were watching him. Watching you. He thought that playing the villain would make them think you weren't leverage anymore." Tears spilled down her cheeks as a sob lodged in her throat. "He broke me," she whispered. "To save me." The stranger nodded sorrowfully. "He chose the only weapon he had, distance." The truth shattered her in a way humiliation never had. Every cruelty she endured had been a shield. A sudden movement down the alley jolted the stranger into action. "Time's up," he whispered urgently. He grabbed her hand firmly, grounding her as fear surged inside her like wildfire. "From here on, you don't look back," he said. "Everything you knew ended tonight." Valeria tightened her grip, feeling the weight of her husband's sacrifice crashing through her chest with unbearable force. And as the stranger pulled her toward the darkness ahead, one final truth echoed inside her. Haunting, painful, and irreversible. She had hated a man who had loved her enough to lose everything. Valeria's legs carried her forward almost without her permission, her hands still locked in the stranger's as they disappeared into the narrow street where the night swallowed every trace of the world she had once known. Her breath trembled in the cold air, carrying fragments of fear, heartbreak, and a dawning realization that cut deeper than any humiliation she had endured inside that glittering hall. She had stepped outside expecting only devastation. Instead, she had found truth, raw, brutal, and impossible to undo. Her husband hadn't abandoned her. He hadn't destroyed her. He had sacrificed himself in ways she could barely comprehend, shredding his own heart to keep hers beating. And now, as the world behind her fractured completely, she understood that nothing would ever return to what it was. The stranger slowed once they reached a darker corridor where the sound of city traffic hummed distantly, a quiet reminder that a normal world still existed somewhere far beyond the chaos threatening to consume them. Valeria leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths as the weight of everything, every lie, every gesture, every unanswered question, crashed through her. She closed her eyes, and in the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw her husband's face again, broken, terrified, begging her to leave him behind for her own survival. The memory pierced her with a pain so sharp she nearly doubled over. It was the look of a man who had chosen to lose everything to save the only thing he still loved. And the knowledge shattered her all over again. The stranger stepped closer, his voice gentle despite the urgency still tightening the air. "I know this is a lot," he said softly. Valeria opened her eyes, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. "He never told me," she whispered. "He carried all of this alone." The stranger nodded. "Not because he didn't trust you," he said, "but because he knew the moment he opened that door, he couldn't protect you anymore." Valeria's heart clenched painfully. "He thought hurting me would save me," she murmured, voice breaking. "He thought distance was love." The stranger's gaze softened with empathy. "And it was," he answered quietly. "A tragic kind of love, but real." A gust of cold wind swept through the alley, lifting loose strands of her hair and chilling the tears on her cheeks, as if the night itself mourned what she had lost. Valeria wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the ache of grief settle deep in her bones. But beneath that grief stirred something else, clarity, sharp and resolute. The truth had not healed her, but it had awakened her. She was no longer blinded by the pain of betrayal or the bitterness of being discarded. She finally understood the impossible burden her husband had carried and the impossible choice he had made. And though it didn't lessen the wound, it gave her the strength to breathe without drowning. The stranger glanced toward the street, scanning the shadows with practiced caution before turning back to her. "We don't have much time," he said. "There's a vehicle waiting 2 blocks from here. Once we reach it, you'll be taken somewhere safe until this is over." The words safe and over felt fragile, uncertain, almost foreign. But Valeria nodded. For the first time, she felt a sliver of control, thin yet present. She straightened slowly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "What about him?" she whispered. The stranger hesitated, the weight of the question heavy in his eyes. "He made his choice long before tonight," he said quietly. "His focus was never escaping. It was ensuring you did." Valeria's throat tightened painfully as she imagined him standing alone in that hall, surrounded by enemies disguised as elegant guests, believing he had protected her by tearing both of their lives apart. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to resent him. But love, real, fractured, imperfect love, doesn't break that easily. And now she understood that the man she thought had betrayed her had actually been fighting silently for her survival all along. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the echo of his sacrifice beat painfully beneath her hand. Love had not left her. It had simply disguised itself as loss. When the stranger placed a guiding hand on her shoulder, Valeria took a steadying breath and stepped forward into the darkness that waited ahead. She wasn't healed. She wasn't whole. But she was no longer trapped in the lies she had once believed. She carried the truth with her now. Heavy, painful, but undeniably hers. And in that truth lived a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Each step she took felt like stitching together pieces of a life broken too suddenly to comprehend. Each breath was a reminder that she was still here, still fighting, still surviving. As they neared the corner where the street opened into the city's faint glow, Valeria paused and looked back, not toward the hall, but toward everything she was leaving behind. The betrayal, the humiliation, the heartbreak, and the love she had misunderstood until it was nearly too late. She whispered a silent promise into the night, a vow shaped by grief and gratitude. "I won't waste what you gave up for me." Then she turned toward the future waiting in the shadows, uncertain yet open, fragile yet possible. The night might have taken everything from her, but it had also given her a truth capable of rebuilding her entire world. If this story touched you, subscribe and activate notifications to receive more deeply emotional narratives. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice helps our stories reach others who need them.